With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning on the AgNet News Hour. Coming up later, insurance options for specialty and organic growers are expanding. But our top story today, several western states have experienced extreme heat in recent days, yet perhaps not as record-setting as what's transpired here in the Golden State. Rod Bain has more.
Extreme heat continues to dominate weather in much of the West. USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey.
Looking at California in particular, we have seen some truly record-shattering temperatures over the last several days, starting on the 5th of July.
For instance, Death Valley, California Sunday reported a high temperature of 129 degrees Fahrenheit, 1 degree short of the all-time record for that area.
We have seen heat extending now further inland across the Great Basin, the Intermountain West, even reaching the western slopes of the Rockies. And while we haven't seen any all-time records being set, we have certainly come close in a number of towns across the western U.S.
Impacts on ag include heavier than normal irrigation demands.
Another concern is wildfire activity. In California, for example, we see 6 active wildfires that have burned at least 1,000 acres, one more than 20,000 acres.
Although light winds to date have helped to curtail wildfire spread. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Strong debate at the House Appropriations Committee Wednesday as the full committee marked up the bill for fiscal year 2025 funding for the Departments of Labor, Health and Human Services, and Education. Subcommittee Chairman Robert Adeholt, a Republican from Alabama, as he introduced the bill.
The bill puts workers first by ensuring businesses can stay open. We protect farmers from a labor department determined to close small, family-owned farms across the nation with regulation after regulation that are having a disastrous effect on our ranchers and our growers. We protect workers from a rule that would eliminate freelance opportunities for 64 million American men, women, seniors, and others balancing work with family responsibilities. We protect frontline workers from dangerous National Labor Relations Board regulations that would cost more than 375,000 jobs. We maintain the federal investment in the world's premier biological institution, the National Institute of Health. We include a proposal to modify the structure of the NIH to achieve administrative savings and allow more funding to go to a lower resource institutions. 10% of the institutions get 75% of NIH funding. These institutions, in addition to receiving an outsized amount of NIH funding, also have endowments totaling over $750 billion. Funding should be more equitably dispersed. Schools with sizable endowments can bear more of the administrative funding of the grants that they receive. The bill also makes a priority on early childhood education and child care vouchers to support working parents. We support school choice for all students by increasing funding for charter schools. We support the right of girls to play fairly in sports without a threat of competition from men. We continue to support first-generation college students, historically black colleges, and Hispanic serving institutions. The bill stops federal support for colleges and universities that are allowing anti-Semitic fueled vandalism and calls for genocide on their campuses.
Much of the debate focused on education issues. Here's Ranking Member Rosa DeLauro, a Democrat from Connecticut.
Anyone who's paid attention to their explicit appeal to destroy public education should not be surprised by what the majority is proposing, but we should all be horrified. The majority cuts the Department of Education by $11 billion, including $5 billion cut from Title I, which will take at least 72,000 teachers out of low-income classrooms in the midst of a teacher shortage. That's over 600 teachers in my state of Connecticut would be shown the door. Pink slips would be handed out to over 900 teachers in Oklahoma, 1,300 in Arizona, over 8,800 teachers in California would lose their jobs. Those are teachers in classrooms in your districts. Hardworking families in your district pay their taxes, send their children to public schools, and this bill says we cannot afford to put a teacher in their classroom in the midst of a teacher shortage.
Some agriculture groups that are watching the process closely say the bill could have benefits for farmers and ranchers. Director of Government Affairs at the American Farm Bureau Federation, John Walt Boatwright, says it includes a freeze on the adverse effect wage rate and fixes for recently announced Department of Labor cuts.
The provisions in this bill really seek to provide some stability in an area that we haven't really had a lot of stability over the past couple of decades as it relates to our labor shortages and our labor costs in farm country. This bill includes some provisions that would provide some of that short-term relief for farmers, that stability for farm workers.
Boatwright says in addition to freezing the adverse effect wage rate,
this bill also addresses some of the flurry of rulemaking that has taken place just in the past couple of years.
You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. In today's National Spotlight, weather conditions for much of the Corn Belt have been favorable for the development of tar spot. Chad Smith has more.
Nick Frederking, an AgriGold agronomist based in southern Illinois, explains.
We need prolonged leaf wetness for the tar spot pathogen to really take off. There is a latent period, a time of dormancy where we don't see the disease visually, but it is developing within the tissue. And here recently in the last week or two, we have seen tar spot confirmed in Illinois counties, Macoupin County to be specific. And I think this is the result of our later planting, moisture, moderate temperatures, 2 or 3 weeks of that latency, and boom, tar spot pops back up. I expect tar spot to be a threat here early on in some of our later planted corn because the conditions were right through May. I also expect it to be a threat moving towards the end of the season with late planted crops because historically we do get cooler with that moisture in the canopy. So tar spot expected to be a player this year.
He's conducting a tar spot field demonstration and explains what he hopes to learn.
One of the studies that we'll have out this year is identifying multiple hybrids in our lineup with a 2-pass fungicide system versus a 1-pass fungicide system, and observing if we can control tar spot at that earlier application window or at least reduce severity moving through the season. Another study that we're going to be looking at is just strictly a plot set of our hybrids up in a known tar spot environment and observing the natural hybrid tolerances and resistance to tar spot out in the field just from an environmental level.
Selecting a tar spot tolerant hybrid is the first line of defense.
We know that we have weeds, we know there's disease, herbicides and fungicides come later, but the first line of defense that we can use against managing these pathogens is genetic resistance through our corn hybrids. So certainly we want to be selecting corn hybrids with high levels of resistance to tar spot if there are known patterns of tar spot in fields, whether in our fields or nearby. So again, driving home the fact that we can use fungicides to alleviate the stress and severity of tar spot, but really selecting that resistant hybrid in those high density fields is where we need to start.
He talks about other steps farmers can take to protect themselves against tar spot.
We still need to continue to scout. That would be the first thing. Scout our fields, stay in contact with other local growers and industry professionals to understand the movement of tar spot. After the herbicide resistance, we've mentioned that we can use fungicides. Now, I think it's a bit early to say whether 2-pass systems are going to be better than 1-pass systems, but know that the work is being done. At the end of the day, we do know that there are different fungicides on the market available to growers that will make an impact and alleviate the severity of tar spot in our fields.
For more information on the different hybrid options available, go to agrigold.com. Chad Smith reporting.
That's today's National Spotlight. Now here's the livestock report. Colorado is leading the nation in the number of dairy cattle infected with highly pathogenic avian influenza. Dr. Maggie Baldwin is the Colorado state veterinarian.
Yeah, unfortunately we are. We have a number of additional dairies that are at varying levels of investigation, from presumptive positive to just currently collecting samples. So we've had quite a number of dairies that have been positive.
In addition, Dr. Baldwin says that HPAI in dairy cattle is now spilling over into poultry flocks.
Now that we're having this virus that, historically, if you and I have been talking about this for a couple of years, but historically the virus would come in with the migratory birds and it would leave with the migratory birds. So the biggest risk for our poultry operations was during, that peak migration season when we had our waterfowl and shorebirds that were migrating through the states. now we have a sustained mammal-to-mammal transmission of this virus, which is posing an even bigger risk to our poultry operations because it's no longer coming in a migratory season. It's just a sustained population that is carrying this virus.
A majority of the HPAI cases are located in northeast Colorado, where most of the state's dairies are located. She says that biosecurity and biocontainment are more important than ever. Her office is investigating how the virus is being spread, but as of now, suspects mechanical spread by vehicles and equipment, and she says it could also be spread by humans. The 32nd annual Giant Barbecue Battle took place one block off the National Mall in Washington, D.C. last month, and Rich Deaton, an Ohio pork producer and National Pork Board member, talked with consumers and military personnel at the event.
Literally thousands and thousands of people that showed up for a Saturday and Sunday. In the middle of that, the National Pork Board sponsored the USO event, which was a competition of chefs. So each branch of the military brought a team of chefs together. They took pork loins and made a different entree. Each team did. Then the attendants of the barbecue battle purchased tickets, and it was a people's choice. So the one they preferred the most, they put their ticket in that box. So it was a really fun event.
He says it was a unique opportunity to promote pork on a national stage.
An opportunity for some states to join with National Pork Board. So we had Pennsylvania, we had Ohio, Illinois, and Iowa that helped sponsor this, along with Smithfield that donated the product. The cool thing about it is it gave us an opportunity to talk to the chefs, have fun with them, ask them questions about how they come up with their entree, and let them be excited about explaining what they're doing.
He says it's very important for pork producers to talk face-to-face with consumers about pork production and find their questions.
You can't replace the value of that face-to-face conversation with consumers where they can look at you in the eye and ask you questions that's valuable and important to them. And you can explain to them how we care for our people, we care for our pigs, and we really care about producing a nutritious, wholesome food for families.
This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. We will be back in just a moment with more agriculture news. Coming up in a few moments, we'll have today's This Land of Ours report, but first, more of the day's agriculture news. And with a preview of what you'll hear today on AgNet West, here's Brian Derman.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced $4.9 million in funding to improve drought monitoring and prediction in the West. The funding includes $3.1 million from NOAA's National Integrated Drought Information System program and $1.8 million from the Inflation Reduction Act. The funding aims to help protect life, property, and ecosystems from drought impacts. U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo highlighted the Biden administration's commitment to making Western communities more resilient to climate change. Droughts are a frequent and costly problem in the West, with a single event in 2022 costing $23.3 billion. Improved drought prediction and monitoring will help answer critical questions about extreme drought conditions and long-term climate changes, aiding communities in their preparation and response. The U.S. Department of Agriculture is expanding crop insurance options for specialty and organic growers starting in 2025. The Risk Management Agency will offer new coverage options, including enterprise units for organic practices and additional eligibility for several crops. This expansion includes coverage for crops like almonds, citrus, walnuts, and avocados, and introduces policies for younger almond trees. Sunburned damaged walnuts will also be eligible for indemnity payments through the expansion. The USDA will also improve policies to reduce administrative burdens and streamline processes for growers. Future announcements will include expanding the shellfish policy and introducing new insurance options for grape growers. The aim is to enhance risk management tools for specialty crop producers and reach a broader group of growers. The reforms to the Private Attorney General Act are coming after a lengthy process of negotiation and advocacy. President and CEO of Western Growers, Dave Puglia, highlights the collaborative work that went into the reform effort.
This will constitute the only significant reform of the Private Attorney General Act of California since it was passed in 2004. There have been many attempts by those of us who represent employers to try and pass even moderate, tiny nibble around the edges reforms over the years. We always get shot down in the legislature, but having a qualified ballot measure sitting out there in November helped create some leverage for us to negotiate a meaningful package of reforms that will, I think, greatly reduce the pain suffered by employers in all sectors of this state who've been shaken down by some really sleazy trial lawyers who've abused the intent of that law to enrich themselves. And so I'm very, very excited about this. It took a ton of money and a ton of work on the part of those of us who made the lift, and a lot of credit to Governor Newsom, who got engaged relatively early, almost 1 full year ago, and made it clear to us and to legislators and to labor that he wanted to see and be part of a meaningful reform of the Private Attorney General Act, and he's seeing it through. So good for him. This is going to be a boost to the economy across all sectors, and I'm just thrilled that we finally got here.
2 events are coming up as part of the California Avocado Growers Seminar Series. The California Avocado Society will be hosting a webinar focused on the use of drones in avocado orchards on Tuesday, July 16th, beginning at 8:30 in the morning. The Zoom seminar will offer an opportunity to learn from speakers with drone experience. The event will feature presentations from 2 drone companies, along with a farmer who's been experimenting with drones in their orchard. There is also a field day scheduled for August 22nd at the Pine Tree Ranch in Santa Paula, beginning at 9 in the morning. The event will highlight a variety of topics, including entomology, pathology, planting density, and techniques. Professor of Extension and Subtropical Horticulture, Mary Lou Arpaio, will also be discussing new avocado varieties. More information about the events is available at californiaavocadosociety.org/seminars. I'm Brian German for AgNet West Radio Network.
The United States is importing more food and farm products. That's coming up on This Land of Ours.
USDA's latest ag trade update shows that so far this fiscal year we've been importing $14 billion more ag products than we've been exporting.
Import growth has been spurred by a relatively strong U.S. economy and a strong dollar, which makes imports less expensive.
USDA economist James Kaufman says these days more Americans have money to spend on imported food and ag products, and the strong dollar means we get more for every dollar we spend. What are we spending it on?
The livestock and meat sector has been a particularly large source of import value growth. A tight domestic market and relatively inexpensive imports from Australia and South America have spurred 20% growth in beef and veal imports so far this year.
And beyond meat,
fresh fruit imports have also been a primary driver of import growth, growing 11%.
Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. Let's talk about LEP. What are the key benefits of your products for farmers in the Western Zone?
So Live Earth Products, we mine and manufacture a ingredient called humate. Now, humate is rich in organic acids called humic acid and fulvic acid. Now, those are common components in your soil organic matter. And here in the Western United States, unlike, those places around the Mississippi going east, actually have very low organic matter. Now, your organic matter is key think of it as the pantry in the soil. So it's key to water retention, nutrient retention, nutrient cycling, microbial activity, those kind of things. So anything that's going to impact the increase in soil organic matter will also impact things like water holding capacity and nutrient holding capacity, which is a big deal here in the West when water is not as abundant as it is in the east side of the United States.
Now, what about nitrate? I know nitrate can be a problem in some soils. So how do LEP products help reduce the nitrate problem on saturated soils?
So Live Earth Products is not unique in how we affect nitrogen, but any organic matter will help retain nitrogen. So typically the mechanisms that we use are blending the nitrogen with the humate. So what happens is the nitrogen will attach to the humic acid, and you will see less of the processes that degrade or volatilize nitrogen. So nitrogen will either convert to a gas, or it'll be converted by microbes into a nitrate and leach to the soil. So the longer you have that product is not being volatilized or converted, it's a longer opportunity for that nutrient to be used by the plant. We have university testing that has shown that when you blend these organic acids with the nutrient, you give that plant a longer opportunity to use that nutrient before it's lost, volatilized, or converted.
To get to know more about Live Earth products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com. Want to help your physical and mental health? Help yourself to some foods and drinks rich in flavonoids. Gary Crawford has more.
A while back, we reported to you on a diet and medical study that followed the diets and health problems of almost 3,000 people for 20 years. A study showing, for example,
those that did consume fruits and vegetables that were high in flavonoid compounds were at least 50% less likely to get dementia or show the signs of it.
Pretty convincing evidence, according to Kansas State University Extension food scientist Karen Blakesley. What are flavonoids? Well, they used to be called vitamin P. Science has shown these compounds to be natural antioxidants.
They are active plant compounds within the foods. They're not added to it. It's naturally a part of the food.
Mostly a part of the dark pigments in certain fruits, berries, and vegetables.
And they've been shown to even help protect against cardiovascular disease or even reduce type 2 diabetes issues.
So Karen says it would be worth our while to seek out those foods high in flavonoids.
When you hear nutrition experts recommend eating more dark-colored foods, your purples, your reds, like berries and red grapes and things like that, you will be getting those flavonoid compounds.
And there are quite a few in foods like peaches, berries, tomatoes, red cabbage, onions, kale, dark green vegetables like broccoli, and many times in concoctions and foods made from those. For example, here's an ancient TV commercial.
So good for you. Take tea and see.
There are 6 subclasses of flavonoids, and one of them is called flavonthreols. And tea falls into that category, also into the flavonols. So black tea, white tea, green tea, that falls in there.
And if tea is not to your taste?
Red wine falls into there too.
Yes, but of course, a word of caution there.
While that's really good for the flavonoid compounds, you don't want to go overboard on consuming those.
Also, there are flavonoids in
chocolate, yummy chocolate.
Dark chocolate in particular. Now, while chocolate can be really tasty, we also want to keep in mind that we don't want to get carried away with it either, because it does contain calories too.
Oh, well, but Karen says the best way to get the most flavonoids is to consume those dark fruits and veggies directly. So that way,
you get lots of good nutrition out of it without a whole lot of calories.
And as science continues to prove,
these fruits and vegetables really can be beneficial and down the road can really help prevent some really major life-changing diseases,
including diabetes and even cancer. This is Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
2 USDA agencies have joined forces to produce a survey designed to collect data about conservation practices on grazing and forest lands. Rod Bain reports.
A USDA collaboration hopes to glean information about voluntary conservation practices in grazing and forest lands.
We're always working to improve these practices, both in terms of the technical standards as well as making them useful to producers. So this survey is of great interest to NRCS.
Dan Malarkey is with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. What he is referring to is what is called the Conservation Practice Adoption Motivation Survey. CPAM's an acronym form. It's a joint effort between NRCS and the National Agricultural Statistics Service.
We have a lot of data on practice use, but we don't have systematic data on why producers pick that practice, why they don't adopt that practice, if they started using the practice, what has their experience been, have they expanded its use after the initial adoption, or have they discontinued it, and why?
NASS is sending the CPAM surveys out this week by mail to 43,000 forest and grazing landowners and managers. Suzanne Adams of the National Agricultural Statistics Service adds some invitations have already been sent for early online survey response at agcounts.usda.gov.
This is a unique project because it is covering several different conservation categories, including crop practices, confined livestock practices, grazing practices, and forestry practices. This year, NASA will be surveying the grazing practices and forestry practices. In 2022, we surveyed the crop practices and confined livestock practices.
She adds there may be follow-up with potential respondents via scheduled interviews if completed questionnaires are not received by July 28th.
A data highlights publication is scheduled for October 24th and will be published on our website at nas.usda.gov.
More details about CPAMs, including previous survey data, can be found at this web address, www.nass.usda.gov/go/CPAMS. I'm Ron Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
This is the AgNet News Hour. We will be back in just a moment with more agriculture news. You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. Here is this week's almond update.
Today's specialty crop news brought to you by the Almond Board of California. You can find them online at almonds.com. While out at the 2024 Salinas Biological Summit, I had the chance to speak with Vice President and Chief Scientific Officer for the Almond Board, Josette Lewis, about how the Almond Board is looking at biologicals and what they're doing in regards to biological options.
So as we look to the future, we are always trying to look at the landscape of regulation, both here in California and also in some of our important export markets. And what can we do to give growers the most options for tools to grow their crop and still meet those requirements, regulatory requirements. So in the area of biologics, as we look forward, we have something called the Sustainable Pest Management Roadmap here in California, which is a hopefully long-term approach by the state to try to continue to advance more sustainable pest management solutions, which can include some of the conventional things like IPM, but also very interested in the role that biologicals or particularly biopesticides can fit within that. We also know that in some of our important export markets like Europe, the minimum residue levels, or MRLs, are getting tighter, and so there is potential that some of the products that we use now and the ways we use them might not be sufficient to meet those requirements in our export markets. So it's really to sort of get ahead of the problem and to try to look at what's out there in the current commercial opportunities as well as what's in the pipeline and make sure that people developing these products know that almonds is interested and is a significant market opportunity. So we kind of have 2 feet in this. One, why we're here at this Biologics Summit and why we're a sponsor is to really elevate the visibility of how big a crop almonds is, and that's an opportunity for technology developers. We want to make sure they think of that, because we don't compare to corn and soybean and some of the broadacre crops. Similarly, that's why Western Growers is hosting this, also to get attention to their commodities. And then the second investment that we're making, which is a larger level of effort, is to do third-party evaluations of products that are commercially either available right now or have gone through most of the registration process here in California, so that we can provide statistically significant, robust information to growers and PCAs about what product performance really looks like in the hands of an unbiased third party. So right now we initiated trials this year on products for bloom disease and some of the fungal and bacterial diseases that we have during the summer months, and those will be multi-year trials. And next year we hope to also initiate trials of biopesticides that work on some of our insect problems.
So quite a bit going on in that arena. One point that you brought up that I had not considered is just kind of raising the profile of almonds. There's a lot of acreage here, and it might not necessarily be thought of to some developers that aren't in California, but talk a little bit more about raising awareness there and showing that almonds are a good area for some research and some development.
Absolutely. This is a great opportunity for us to work with Western growers, which has global reach. Many of the growers of their commodities operate both here in California and in other parts of the world. And so they don't fund research like we do at the Almond Board. So for them, this is a major tactic to get attention to the problems that their growers need to solve. So by partnering with them, we get that visibility globally. And we see that here today because we have technology developers from New Zealand, Australia, the UK, really throughout the world, Denmark. So it's a chance for us to get attention to our crop. Again, we are huge here in California. If your listeners are here mostly in the States, so they know that. But it's really surprising how much the world doesn't recognize how big agriculture is in California writ large, and then in particular that almonds is the largest crop by acreage. So it's a pretty small investment to be part of this biologic summit. We have a chance to be on panels this afternoon to also raise the visibility. We've been giving out some great California almonds as snacks at the breaks as well. So it's a chance to really get the attention of not just the big companies that we all know, the Bayer Crop Sciences, the Cortevas of this world, but also these more entrepreneurial startups who, again, we are playing an important role in helping also evaluate those through third parties so that growers have information that hopefully they can trust. We understand there's a lot of products out there, often called snake oil. I've heard bug juice, a lot of other derogatory terms, and that has given growers a pause about looking at these kinds of products. So by doing that third-party evaluation, we hope to give both growers and PCAs some information they can trust over multiple years that's statistically sound and collected by an unbiased partner.
And now, obviously, there is never going to be a silver bullet fix for no matter what kind of problem agriculture is facing, but biologics might serve an important role, especially as the state collectively starts to look more sustainably and maybe using a little bit less conventional. Talk about the role that biologics might play and how the Almond Board is trying to maybe cultivate some understanding there and get that out to growers.
Yeah, so there is no silver bullet. I think every grower kind of realizes that. They have to do a lot of things throughout the season, and sometimes they have to have multiple tools to control even a single problem like navel orangeworm, where we've got, 4 or 5 different tools in our toolkit for that one pest. So the hope is that biologics can fit within a conventional farming system and be part of a conventional IPM. So in addition to evaluating if they work, we will also be looking at how they work within a conventional IPM, and maybe even in conjunction with conventional crop protection products as well. Maybe they offer a way to kind of knock down the pest load or the disease load so that a lighter application or a single application of a conventional product can be more effective. If you look at something like navel orangeworm, as most growers hopefully know, it's all about keeping the population low at the start of the season because it reproduces exponentially. So by knocking it down early in the season, we have a better chance of having effective use of the conventional crop protection products we have later in the season. So, biologics can fit within conventional agriculture, not just for organics. So organics is a small segment of the industry here in California. So really the focus is on if they work and then how do they work within a conventional IPM system. Do they add some early season protection or suppression that allows us to be more effective with fewer sprays later in the season? Those types of things that we hope to discover through this evaluation program and from hearing from our peers here at this conference.
That is this week's Almond Update. You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. Now for another look at today's top stories. Strong debate at the House Appropriations Committee Wednesday as the full committee marked up the bill for fiscal year 2025 funding for the Departments of Labor, Health and Human Services, and Education. Subcommittee Chairman Robert Adeholt, a Republican from Alabama, as he introduced the bill.
The bill puts workers first by ensuring businesses can stay open. We protect farmers from a labor department determined to close small, family-owned farms across the nation with regulation after regulation that are having a disastrous effect on our ranchers and our growers. We protect workers from a rule that would eliminate freelance opportunities for 64 million American men, women, seniors, and others balancing work with family responsibilities. We protect frontline workers from dangerous National Labor Relations Board regulations that would cost more than 375,000 jobs.
Much of the debate focused on education issues. Here's Ranking Member Rosa DeLauro, a Democrat from Connecticut.
Anyone who's paid attention to their explicit appeal to destroy public education should not be surprised by what the majority is proposing, but we should all be horrified. The majority cuts the Department of Education by $11 billion, including $5 billion cut from Title I, which will take at least 72,000 teachers out of low-income classrooms in the midst of a teacher shortage.
Some agriculture groups that are watching the process closely say the bill could have benefits for farmers and ranchers. Director of Government Affairs at the American Farm Bureau Federation, John Walt Boatwright, says it includes a freeze on the adverse effect wage rate and fixes for recently announced Department of Labor cuts.
The provisions in this bill really seek to provide some stability in an area that we haven't really had a lot of stability over the past couple of decades as it relates to our labor shortages and our labor costs in farm country. This bill includes some provisions that would provide some of that short-term relief for farmers, that stability for farm workers.
Boatwright says in addition to freezing the adverse effect wage rate,
this bill also addresses some of the flurry of rulemaking that has taken place just in the past couple of years.
In other news this morning, several western states have experienced extreme heat in recent days, yet perhaps not as record-setting as what has transpired in the Golden State. USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey looks at recent high temperatures in California communities approaching near records or reaching all-time records.
Just a couple of numbers to put this in perspective. The modern-day high temperature record in Death Valley, California is 130 degrees. That has been achieved several times in recent years. This heat wave, we saw a temperature peak of 129 on July 7th. We did see several communities and cities in California either tying or setting all-time records for any month of the year. A short list on that includes Palm Springs, 124 degrees on July 5th. And then the following day, we saw an all-time record high of 119 in the northern Sacramento Valley at Redding. And then closer to the coast, Ukiah, California, 117 on July 6th. That heat has continued in recent days in Southern California, Lancaster, California, 115 on July 7th, and then Barstow, Daggett hitting 118 degrees on both July 7th and 8th.
And he looks at expanding extreme heat across the western half of the country and how that might impact crop development.
The big western ridge that really set up very strongly just after the 4th of July and persists to this time has begun to shift eastward. And as we see that high pressure ridge moving across more toward the nation's midsection, temperatures are just starting to rise across the northern high plains. And over the next 5 to 7 days, that heat will become more fully established, especially across the northern and central plains. From the winter wheat harvest perspective, that is fantastic news. That will help to dry down the crop across the northern plains. Harvest should continue to race northward through the central and northern plains, but then you have to be concerned about some of the summer crops. Now, spring wheat has had a pretty good season to date. We'll have to watch if this heat has any late season impacts on that crop, which is heading out at this time. Also, as you move further south, there are concerns for crops like corn and soybeans as temperatures get up into the low triple-digit range later this week.
That's today's top agriculture news. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. Thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West online at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also find our broadcast team of Brian German and Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.